Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. When security cameras captured a woman in military uniform walking confidently through the gates of Naval Base San Diego, no one suspected that beneath her perfectly pressed Navy SEAL insignia lay a secret that would shake the military establishment to its core. What started as an elaborate deception would end with a shocking revelation that even she didn't see coming. The woman's name was Sarah Mitchell, and for 3 months she had successfully convinced everyone around her that she was a decorated Navy SEAL who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan. Her knowledge of military protocol was flawless, her bearing unmistakably military, and her stories of combat operations so detailed that even seasoned veterans never questioned her credentials. But on a humid Tuesday morning in July, everything would unravel in the most unexpected way possible. As military police led her away in handcuffs for impersonating a federal officer, Admiral James Harrison caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. There, partially visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve, was a tattoo that he recognized immediately, a tattoo that belonged to someone he thought had died in a classified operation 8 years ago. What Admiral Harrison saw in that brief moment would launch the most sensitive military investigation in recent memory, revealing a truth so extraordinary that it would challenge everything the Navy believed about one of their most tragic losses. This is the story of how a simple tattoo became the key to unlocking a mystery that the military had given up hope of ever solving. Sarah Mitchell had always been good at becoming whoever she needed to be. Growing up in foster care in Detroit had taught her that survival often meant adapting quickly, reading people's expectations, and giving them exactly what they wanted to see. But this time, she had outdone herself. Standing in front of the mirror in her cramped apartment, she adjusted the Navy SEAL trident on her dress blue uniform one final time. The reflection staring back at her looked every inch the decorated war hero she claimed to be. The uniform itself had cost her 3 months' worth of savings, purchased piece by piece from military surplus stores and online auctions. She had studied every regulation, every ribbon placement, every detail, until she could dress herself in complete darkness and still look regulation perfect. The SEAL trident, the most important piece, had been the hardest to acquire. She had finally found one in an estate sale, sold by the widow of a Vietnam veteran who had no idea of its significance. Sarah's transformation into Petty Officer First Class Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, had begun 6 months earlier when she lost her job at a security firm in San Diego. The company had downsized, and despite her excellent record, she found herself among the casualties. With rent due and her savings dwindling, she had started frequenting a bar near the naval base, where off-duty service members gathered. It was there that she first noticed how differently people treated anyone in uniform, especially those with special operations insignia. The respect was immediate and unquestioning. Drinks were bought, stories were shared, and connections were made. Sarah had always been an excellent listener, absorbing every detail about military life, operations, and culture. She had a natural gift for remembering specifics, the kind of details that made her stories believable. Within weeks, she knew more about Navy SEAL operations than many civilian contractors who worked directly with Special Operations Forces. Her first test had been at a job interview with a defense contractor. When she mentioned her military background, the interviewer's entire demeanor changed. Suddenly, her lack of college degree didn't matter. Her spotty employment history was forgotten. All that mattered was that she was a Navy SEAL, and Navy SEALs were the best of the best. She got the job on the spot, with a salary nearly double what she had been making in security. The success was intoxicating. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly respected. People looked at her differently when she wore the uniform. They listened when she spoke. They thanked her for her service. The fake identity she had created gave her something she had never experienced before, a sense of belonging and purpose. At first, she only wore the uniform occasionally, for job interviews or special events, but as her confidence grew, so did her boldness. She began attending military ceremonies and veterans gatherings. She even started a relationship with Mark, a Marine Corps sergeant she had met at a Memorial Day barbecue. Mark never questioned her background because, why would he? Her knowledge was too detailed, her bearing too authentic for anyone to suspect deception. Sarah had spent countless hours researching Navy SEAL operations, watching documentaries, reading books, and studying online forums where former SEALs shared their experiences. She knew about the grueling training at Coronado, the culture of the teams, and the specific operations that had made headlines over the past decade. More importantly, she understood the warrior ethos that drove these elite operators. Her backstory was carefully crafted and consistently told. She claimed to have served 2 tours in Afghanistan with SEAL Team 5, participating in direct action raids against high-value targets. She spoke knowledgeably, about the challenges of operating in mountainous terrain, the importance of local intelligence networks, and the brotherhood forged in combat. When other veterans shared their own experiences, she listened intently, adding details that enhanced her own fictional narrative. The tattoo on her left forearm had become an integral part of her identity. It was a complex design featuring a warrior's helmet surrounded by intricate symbols that she claimed represented her fallen teammates. She had gotten the tattoo years earlier, long before her transformation, during a rebellious phase in her early 20s. The artist had been particularly talented, creating something that looked both ancient and military-inspired. Now it served as powerful visual proof of her supposed service and sacrifice. Sarah's ability to maintain her deception was remarkable. She never slipped up on details, never contradicted herself, and always projected the quiet confidence associated with special operations veterans. She had studied body language, speech patterns, and even the way SEALs carried themselves. Her performance was so convincing that she often forgot she was acting. The job with the defense contractor had led to better opportunities. Her supposed security clearance and combat experience made her valuable in the defense industry. She moved from company to company, each position offering better pay and more responsibility. Her fake military record opened doors that had been firmly closed to her before. Living the lie required constant vigilance. Sarah had to keep track of every story she told, every detail she shared, and every relationship she built based on her false identity. She created elaborate backstories for her supposed teammates, complete with names, personalities, and fates. Some had been killed in action, others had left the military, and a few were still serving in classified roles that explained why no one could verify her stories through them. The weight of maintaining such an extensive deception was enormous, but the benefits seemed to outweigh the risks. Sarah had found success, respect, and love, all things that had eluded her throughout her difficult childhood and young adulthood. The fake uniform had given her a new life, and she was determined to protect it at all costs. However, success had made her careless. What had started as occasional appearances in uniform had escalated to almost daily wear. She wore her military identification to restaurants for discounts, to events for VIP treatment, and to work as part of her professional identity. The line between Sarah the struggling foster kid and Sarah the decorated Navy SEAL had completely disappeared. Her relationship with Mark had deepened and they were talking about marriage. She had even been invited to speak at a local high school about military service and overcoming adversity. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using a completely fabricated identity to inspire young people to be authentic and true to themselves. The closer she came to complete integration into military and veteran communities, the greater the risk became. But Sarah felt invincible. She had fooled everyone for months, including military personnel who should have been able to spot a fake. Her confidence in her ability to maintain the deception had grown to the point where she believed she could sustain it indefinitely. On the morning of July 15th, Sarah put on her uniform with the same careful attention to detail she had practiced for months. Today was different, though. She had been invited to tour Naval Base San Diego with a group of defense contractors. It would be her first time on an active military installation while impersonating a service member, but she felt ready for the challenge. As she pinned her SEAL trident to her uniform and checked her appearance one final time, Sarah Mitchell had no idea that this would be the day her carefully constructed world would come crashing down. The tattoo that had helped convince so many people of her authenticity was about to expose a truth that she herself didn't understand, and that the US Navy had spent 8 years trying to forget. The morning of July 15 started like any other for Sarah Mitchell, but it would end with her world completely shattered. She arrived at Naval Base San Diego at 0800 hours sharp, her dress blues immaculate and her confidence unwavering. The tour group consisted of 12 defense contractors and 3 military escorts, and Sarah blended in perfectly among the civilians who were there to evaluate new equipment proposals. Lieutenant Commander Peterson, their primary escort, was a by-the-book officer who took security protocols seriously. As they approached the main gate, he reminded everyone to have their identification ready and to follow all base regulations during the tour. Sarah's fake military ID had passed inspection at civilian facilities before, but this would be its first real test at an active military installation. The security checkpoint was more thorough than Sarah had expected. The guard examined each ID carefully, checking it against computer databases and asking follow-up questions about unit assignments and duty stations. When her turn came, Sarah handed over her fabricated credentials with practiced nonchalance, maintaining the calm demeanor she had perfected over months of deception. "Petty Officer Mitchell, SEAL Team 5, she stated clearly. making direct eye contact with the guard as she had trained herself to do. The guard scanned the ID and typed something into his computer. Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, but her external appearance remained completely composed. The database check should have exposed her immediately. Military personnel records are comprehensive and regularly updated, and no Sarah Mitchell had ever served with SEAL Team 5. However, a computer glitch that morning had caused intermittent connectivity issues with the personnel database. After several failed attempts to verify her information, the guard made the decision that would allow Sarah's deception to continue for a few more hours. He handed back her ID and waved her through. The tour began at the Naval Special Warfare Center, where potential contractors could observe training exercises and equipment demonstrations. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of watching actual Navy SEALs conduct training drills while wearing the uniform of the unit she was impersonating. The irony was almost overwhelming, but she maintained her composure and even offered knowledgeable commentary about the tactics being demonstrated. Her extensive research served her well as she discussed the finer points of close-quarters combat and maritime infiltration techniques with other contractors. Several active duty SEALs who overheard her conversations nodded approvingly at her insights. None of them recognized her, which wasn't surprising given the size and compartmentalized nature of the SEAL community. But her expertise impressed them. As the group moved through different facilities, Sarah's confidence continued to grow. She was succeeding at the highest level of her deception, fooling even the elite warriors whose identity she had stolen. The rush was intoxicating, and she began to believe that she truly was invincible. The trouble began during the lunch break at the base officers' club. Sarah was sitting with several contractors discussing the morning's demonstrations when she noticed a commotion near the entrance. Military police officers were speaking urgently with base security personnel, and their body language suggested something serious was happening. Unknown to Sarah, the computer systems had been restored during the morning, and a routine audit of the day's visitor logs had revealed several discrepancies. Her name had been flagged as having no corresponding record in the military personnel database. Security personnel had spent the past hour trying to locate the source of the false identification, and they had finally traced it to the contractor tour group. Lieutenant Commander Peterson received the alert on his secure communication device during lunch. His expression darkened as he read the message, and he immediately excused himself from the table. Within minutes, military police officers were quietly positioning themselves around the officers' club, preparing to detain the imposter who had somehow infiltrated their base. Sarah noticed the increased security presence but initially didn't connect it to her situation. She had become so comfortable in her false identity that the possibility of exposure seemed remote. It wasn't until she saw Lieutenant Commander Peterson approaching her table with 2 military police officers that reality began to set in.
Petty Officer Mitchell, could you step outside with us, please? Peterson's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable tone of authority.
Sarah's training in reading people immediately told her that something was very wrong. Her mind raced through possibilities, but she maintained her outward composure as she stood and followed the officers outside. Once they were away from the other contractors, Peterson's demeanor changed completely. "Ma'am, we need to see your military identification again, and we'll need you to answer some questions about your service record." The use of ma'am instead of her supposed rank was a clear signal that her cover had been blown. Sarah's first instinct was to maintain the deception. She had talked her way out of difficult situations before, and she believed she could do it again. She handed over her fake ID and began reciting her carefully rehearsed backstory, providing specific details about her training, deployments, and unit assignments. But the military police officers were prepared for her responses. They had run comprehensive background checks and knew exactly what questions would expose her lies. Within 10 minutes, it became clear that Sarah Mitchell had never served in the United States Navy, let alone as a Navy SEAL.
The moment of her arrest was both terrifying and strangely liberating.
For months, Sarah had lived in constant fear that her deception would be discovered. The reality of being caught was almost a relief compared to the stress of maintaining such an elaborate lie. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she felt a complex mixture of shame, fear, and an odd sense of freedom. The charges against her were serious: impersonating a federal officer, fraudulent use of military identification, and unauthorized access to a military installation. Each charge carried significant potential jail time, and the military took such violations extremely seriously. The fact that she had chosen to impersonate a Navy SEAL, one of the most respected and elite units in the armed forces, would likely result in the harshest possible penalties. As the military police officers led her toward their vehicle, Sarah caught sight of a tall, distinguished officer observing the situation from a distance. Admiral James Harrison had been visiting the base for a routine inspection when word of the arrest reached his staff. Something about the situation had piqued his interest, and he had come to see the imposter for himself. Admiral Harrison had served in the Navy for over 30 years, rising through the ranks to become one of the most respected leaders in the special operations community. He had seen numerous cases of military impersonation during his career, usually involving individuals seeking to gain respect or financial benefits they hadn't earned. Most were relatively straightforward cases that resulted in predictable legal consequences. But as Sarah was escorted past him, something caught his attention that made him stop in his tracks. Her left sleeve had ridden up slightly during the arrest, revealing a portion of her tattoo. What Admiral Harrison saw in that brief glimpse defied all logical explanation and contradicted everything he thought he knew about a tragedy that had haunted him for 8 years. The tattoo was distinctive and complex, featuring symbols that most people would dismiss as artistic decoration. But Admiral Harrison recognized those symbols immediately because he had seen them before, in a classified briefing that very few people in the military had ever been allowed to attend. The tattoo contained elements that should have been known only to a select group of special operations personnel who had participated in one of the Navy's most sensitive missions. As the military police vehicle drove away with Sarah in the back seat, Admiral Harrison stood motionless on the sidewalk, his mind racing through implications that seemed impossible. The tattoo he had just seen belonged to someone who had supposedly died in Afghanistan 8 years earlier during a classified operation that had never been fully explained to the public. The arrest of Sarah Mitchell for impersonating a Navy SEAL had just become the least important part of a story that was about to challenge everything the Navy believed about one of their most closely guarded secrets. Admiral Harrison knew that he needed to see that tattoo again, and more importantly, he needed to understand how a woman who had never served in the military had come to possess markings that belonged to a ghost. Admiral James Harrison had not slept since witnessing Sarah Mitchell's arrest 3 days earlier. The image of her tattoo was burned into his memory, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw those distinctive symbols that should have been buried with their original owner 8 years ago. The implications were staggering, and Harrison found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about Operation Silent Echo, one of the most classified missions in recent Navy history. The operation had taken place in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, where a small team of Navy SEALs had been tasked with locating and extracting a high-value intelligence asset who had gone dark behind enemy lines. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong, resulting in the deaths of 3 team members and the complete disappearance of another. That missing operator, Petty Officer First Class Amanda Chen, had been declared killed in action after extensive search efforts failed to recover her body. Harrison had been a captain at the time, serving as the mission commander who had authorized the operation. The failure weighed heavily on his conscience, particularly because Amanda Chen had been one of the most promising young operators he had ever encountered. She was brilliant, fearless, and dedicated to her country in a way that inspired everyone around her. Her loss had been devastating to the entire special operations community. What made Amanda Chen's case particularly unusual was the tattoo she had gotten just weeks before her final deployment. She had designed it herself, incorporating symbols from ancient warrior cultures that held personal significance to her family heritage. The tattoo was elaborate and unique, featuring specific elements that she had researched extensively and insisted on having rendered exactly to her specifications. Harrison remembered the briefing where Amanda had explained the meaning behind each symbol to her team members. There was the helmet of a Spartan warrior representing courage and sacrifice. Surrounding it were Celtic knots symbolizing eternal bonds between warriors, and Norse runes that spelled out concepts of honor and victory. The overall design was intricate and meaningful, created by an artist who specialized in culturally significant tattoos. The symbols were so distinctive that Harrison had included detailed photographs of the tattoo in Amanda's personnel file as part of the identification protocols for special operations personnel. In the event that remains were recovered, the tattoo would serve as a definitive means of identification. It was a practice that had proven valuable in several cases where traditional identification methods were compromised. After Sarah's arrest, Harrison had immediately requested access to Amanda Chen's classified file. The photographs were exactly as he remembered them, and they matched perfectly with what he had glimpsed on Sarah Mitchell's arm. The probability of 2 people independently creating identical tattoos with such specific and obscure symbolic elements was virtually zero. Harrison's first instinct was that Sarah Mitchell must somehow be connected to Amanda Chen. Perhaps she was a relative who had copied the design as a tribute, or maybe she had encountered the original tattoo artist and requested the same design. But preliminary background checks on Sarah revealed no connections to military families or to the specialized tattoo artist who had created Amanda's design. The security footage from Sarah's arrest was reviewed multiple times, but the angle and brief exposure made it difficult to examine the tattoo in detail. Harrison needed a closer look, which meant arranging to interview Sarah while she was in military custody awaiting trial. This would require careful navigation of legal protocols and jurisdictional issues. Sarah was being held at the Naval Consolidated Brig in Miramar, facing charges that could result in several years in federal prison. Her assigned defense attorney, Lieutenant Janet Rodriguez, was competent but overworked, handling multiple cases of military justice violations. The case seemed straightforward enough that Rodriguez expected to negotiate a plea agreement that would minimize Sarah's jail time. When Admiral Harrison requested permission to interview the prisoner, it raised eyebrows throughout the command structure. Admirals typically did not involve themselves in routine impersonation cases, and Harrison's sudden interest generated questions he was not prepared to answer. He needed to see the tattoo without revealing the classified operation that had made it significant. Harrison arranged the interview under the pretext of studying patterns in military impersonation cases for a broader security review. He brought along Commander Patricia Walsh, a naval intelligence officer who specialized in personnel security investigations. Walsh was read into Operation Silent Echo and would be able to verify Harrison's observations about the tattoo without compromising operational security. The interview took place in a sterile conference room at the brig, with Sarah shackled to a metal chair and flanked by guards. She looked tired and defeated, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had walked onto the naval base in a stolen uniform. The weight of her situation was clearly taking its toll, and Harrison could see the fear in her eyes as he introduced himself. Sarah was initially suspicious of the Admiral's interest in her case. She had expected to deal with investigators and prosecutors, but the involvement of such a high-ranking officer suggested that her situation was more serious than she had realized. Her defense attorney had advised her to cooperate fully with any investigation, but Sarah remained cautious about revealing too much. Harrison began with routine questions about her background, her motivations for impersonating a Navy SEAL, and the method she had used to create her false identity. Sarah answered honestly, having already confessed to the basic charges against her. She explained her difficult childhood, her struggles with employment, and her gradual descent into a deception that had spiraled beyond her control. As the interview progressed, Harrison steered the conversation towards Sarah's personal history, looking for any connection to Amanda Chen or Operation Silent Echo. He asked about her travels, her relationships, and her interests in military culture. Sarah's answers revealed nothing that would explain her possession of Amanda's distinctive tattoo design. Finally, Harrison addressed the tattoo directly. "I noticed some interesting artwork on your arm during your arrest," he said casually. "Could you tell me about the significance of those symbols?" Sarah's expression changed immediately, and Harrison could see that the tattoo held deep personal meaning for her. Sarah rolled up her sleeve to reveal the full design, and both Harrison and Commander Walsh immediately recognized the perfect match to Amanda Chen's tattoo. Every detail was identical, from the specific style of the Spartan helmet to the exact arrangement of the Celtic knots. The precision of the reproduction was extraordinary, suggesting either access to detailed photographs or the work of the same artist. "I designed it myself," Sarah said proudly, unaware of the impact her words were having on her interrogators. "I spent months researching the symbols and their meanings. The artist said it was one of the most complex pieces he'd ever done." She went on to explain each element of the design, providing the same interpretations that Amanda Chen had shared with her team members years earlier. Harrison and Walsh exchanged glances, both recognizing the impossibility of what they were witnessing. Sarah's explanation was delivered with the passion of someone who had genuinely created the design herself, yet she was describing a tattoo that had been documented in classified files before she claimed to have conceived it. The interview continued for another hour, but Harrison learned nothing that would explain the mystery. Sarah insisted that the tattoo was her original creation, designed during a period of personal growth and self-discovery. She provided details about the research process, the artist who had created it, and the personal meaning behind each symbol. Her story was consistent and heartfelt, but it contradicted the documented history of the design. As the interview concluded, Harrison faced a dilemma that would challenge everything he thought he understood about Amanda Chen's fate. Either Sarah Mitchell was lying about creating the tattoo design, or she had somehow independently developed an identical concept that matched classified documentation in every detail. Neither explanation seemed plausible, but one of them had to be true. Commander Walsh shared Harrison's bewilderment as they reviewed the interview recordings later that day. The security implications were staggering if Sarah had somehow gained access to classified information about Amanda Chen's tattoo. but her background check revealed no connections to intelligence agencies, military contractors, or anyone else who might have had access to such sensitive material. Harrison found himself confronting an impossible puzzle that threatened to undermine his understanding of one of the Navy's most painful losses. The tattoo that had helped identify Amanda Chen as a fallen hero was now being worn by a woman who insisted she had created the design herself. The coincidence was too extraordinary to accept, but the evidence was undeniable. As Harrison returned to his office that evening, he knew that the case of Sarah Mitchell had become something far more complex than military impersonation. The tattoo that had caught his attention represented a mystery that could force the Navy to re-examine everything it believed about Operation Silent Echo and the fate of Amanda Chen. The Admiral realized that he was standing at the threshold of a discovery that could change military history, but he also understood that pursuing the truth might uncover secrets that some people would prefer to keep buried forever. The investigation that Admiral Harrison launched into Sarah Mitchell's tattoo would eventually require the highest levels of security clearance and involve personnel from multiple intelligence agencies. What had started as a simple case of military impersonation was rapidly evolving into one of the most sensitive inquiries in recent military history. Harrison's first step was to locate Marcus Chen, Amanda's older brother, who had served as her emergency contact during her military service. Marcus was a civilian engineer living in Seattle, completely unaware that his sister's disappearance had become connected to a case of military fraud in San Diego. The phone call he received from Admiral Harrison would shatter 8 years of carefully maintained grief and acceptance. Marcus Chen had never fully accepted the official explanation of his sister's death. Amanda had been too skilled, too careful, and too determined to simply vanish without a trace during a routine extraction mission. He had spent years filing Freedom of Information Act requests, trying to learn more about the circumstances of her disappearance. But the classified nature of Operation Silent Echo had prevented him from obtaining any meaningful details. When Harrison explained the situation with Sarah Mitchell's tattoo, Marcus's immediate reaction was disbelief followed by a desperate hope that his sister might somehow still be alive. He agreed to travel to San Diego immediately to view the tattoo himself and provide any information that might help solve the mystery. Meanwhile, Harrison had assigned Commander Walsh to conduct a comprehensive investigation into Sarah Mitchell's background, going far deeper than the initial security checks that had revealed her false identity. Walsh assembled a team of specialists to examine every aspect of Sarah's life, from her birth records to her recent employment history. What they discovered was both fascinating and troubling. Sarah's early life had been marked by instability and trauma that would have lasting effects on her psychological development. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with drug addiction, Sarah had been placed in foster care at the age of 3 and had never known her biological father. Her foster care experience had been particularly difficult, involving multiple placements and at least 2 documented cases of abuse. Sarah had developed exceptional survival skills, learning to adapt quickly to new environments and to present whatever personality would be most acceptable to her caregivers. These skills would later serve her well in her elaborate military impersonation. One detail in Sarah's background caught Commander Walsh's attention immediately. At the age of 16, Sarah had been placed in a group home in Sacramento that housed approximately 20 teenagers from difficult backgrounds. The facility, known as Haven House, specialized in providing therapeutic support for adolescents who had experienced significant trauma. What made this placement significant was the timing. Amanda Chen had volunteered at Haven House during her senior year of high school, working with troubled teenagers as part of a community service project. The overlap between Sarah's residency and Amanda's volunteer work was approximately 6 months, creating the first documented connection between the two women. Walsh traveled to Sacramento to interview former staff members and residents of Haven House, hoping to learn more about the possible interaction between Sarah and Amanda. The facility had changed significantly over the past 15 years, but several long-term staff members were still employed there and remembered both young women clearly. Dr. Elizabeth Morris, the facility's former chief psychologist, recalled Amanda Chen as an exceptional volunteer who had shown remarkable empathy and skill in working with traumatized teenagers. Amanda had been considering a career in military service but was also interested in psychology and social work. Her volunteer experience at Haven House had been part of her exploration of different ways to serve her community. Sarah Mitchell was also memorable to Dr. Morris, but for different reasons. Sarah had been one of the most challenging residents in the facility's history, displaying a complex combination of intelligence, manipulation, and genuine vulnerability. She had an extraordinary ability to read people and adapt her behavior to gain their trust and approval. According to Dr. Morris, Sarah had formed an unusually strong attachment to Amanda Chen during her volunteer period. Sarah rarely connected with adults, but she seemed to genuinely admire Amanda's confidence, purpose, and military bearing. Amanda, in turn, had taken a special interest in helping Sarah overcome the trauma and instability that had defined her young life. The relationship between the two young women had been professional and appropriate, but it had clearly made a significant impact on Sarah. Dr. Morris recalled that Sarah had talked frequently about wanting to serve her country like Amanda planned to do. For a teenager who had never experienced stability or positive role models, Amanda represented everything Sarah wished she could become. The connection explained how Sarah might have learned about Amanda's tattoo design, but it raised even more disturbing questions about the depth of Sarah's deception. If she had known Amanda personally and learned of her military service, Sarah's choice to impersonate a Navy SEAL took on a darker dimension that suggested psychological issues beyond simple fraud. Commander Walsh's investigation team also discovered that Sarah had maintained some connection to Amanda's memory even after leaving Haven House. She had followed Amanda's military career through social media and public records, learning about her deployment to Afghanistan and eventually her reported death during Operation Silent Echo. When Marcus Chen arrived in San Diego to view Sarah's tattoo, the meeting was arranged under strict security protocols at the Naval Intelligence Facility. Marcus had brought with him several photographs of his sister, including detailed images of her tattoo taken shortly after she had gotten it. The comparison with Sarah's tattoo would provide definitive evidence of their connection. The moment Marcus saw Sarah's tattoo, his composure completely shattered. The design was not merely similar to his sister's tattoo, it was absolutely identical in every detail. Marcus had been present when Amanda designed the tattoo, and had helped her research the historical significance of each symbol. There was no possibility that Sarah could have independently created the same design. But Marcus noticed something else that sent chills down his spine. Mixed among the familiar symbols was one element that had not been present in his sister's original tattoo, a small, discreet marking near the base of the design that looked like it might have been added later. When he pointed this out to Admiral Harrison, it opened an entirely new line of investigation. The additional symbol was analyzed by military intelligence specialists and identified as a marker used by certain intelligence agencies to identify deep cover operatives. The implication was staggering. If the symbol was authentic, it suggested that Amanda Chen might have survived Operation Silent Echo and been recruited into a classified program that required her to assume a new identity. This possibility led Harrison to request access to the most sensitive files related to Operation Silent Echo, including operational details that had been withheld even from the mission briefings he had attended as the commanding officer. What he discovered would challenge everything he thought he knew about the mission and his former subordinate. Operation Silent Echo had not been a simple extraction mission as Harrison had been told. It was actually a cover story for a much more complex operation involving the insertion of a deep cover asset into terrorist networks operating in the region. Amanda Chen had not been killed during the mission, she had been successfully placed in deep cover, with her death serving as the perfect cover for her new identity. The revelation explained why search efforts had failed to recover Amanda's body, and why the mission details had remained classified long after most special operations were declassified. Amanda Chen was alive, operating under a false identity in some of the most dangerous regions of the world, serving her country in ways that her family and former teammates could never know. But if Amanda was alive and operating under deep cover, how had Sarah Mitchell come to possess her tattoo design? The answer to that question would lead Harrison and his investigation team into the darkest corners of military intelligence operations, where the line between truth and deception became so blurred that even experienced intelligence officers struggled to distinguish reality from carefully constructed fiction. The case of Sarah Mitchell had become much more than military impersonation. It was now a window into the secret world of deep cover operations, where heroes were forced to become ghosts, and families were left to grieve for loved ones who were still serving their country in the shadows. Admiral Harrison was beginning to understand that the truth he was uncovering might be too dangerous for anyone to know, including himself. The truth that Admiral Harrison finally uncovered would prove to be more extraordinary than any scenario he had imagined during his investigation. The revelation came not through further investigation, but through an encrypted message that arrived at his secure terminal on a quiet Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Sarah Mitchell's arrest. The message was brief and carried the highest classification markings. It instructed Harrison to meet with a representative from the Defense Intelligence Agency at a secure facility outside San Diego. No other details were provided, but the authorization codes indicated that the meeting had been approved by the highest levels of military command. The meeting took place in an unmarked building that served as a front for intelligence operations. Harrison was escorted to a windowless conference room where he found a woman in civilian clothes waiting for him. She identified herself only as Agent Martinez and carried credentials that indicated she was authorized to discuss materials related to Operation Silent Echo. What Agent Martinez told Harrison during their 2-hour meeting would fundamentally change his understanding of the case and force him to confront the most closely guarded secrets of modern intelligence operations. The story she revealed was so extraordinary that it challenged the very nature of identity, sacrifice, and service to country. Amanda Chen had indeed survived Operation Silent Echo, but not in the way Harrison had begun to suspect. The mission had gone wrong exactly as reported, with 3 team members killed and Amanda severely wounded and captured by enemy forces. However, instead of being executed or held prisoner, Amanda had been rescued by a different kind of operation entirely, a joint CIA and military intelligence unit that specialized in extracting captured personnel had located Amanda 3 months after her disappearance. She had been held in a remote compound where her captors had subjected her to intense psychological pressure designed to break her resistance and extract military secrets. The trauma she suffered during this period had profound effects on her mental state and memory. When Amanda was finally rescued, military physicians discovered that she had sustained traumatic brain injuries during her captivity that affected her memory and cognitive functions. She retained most of her basic skills and personality, but significant portions of her personal history had been damaged or completely lost. She remembered her military training, her dedication to service, and her core values, but she had no clear recollection of her family, her childhood, or her life before joining the Navy. The military faced an unprecedented situation. Amanda Chen was a highly trained special operations soldier who wanted to continue serving her country, but she could not be returned to her previous life because she no longer remembered it. Traditional military medical discharge would have been the normal protocol, but Amanda's unique skills and her own desire to serve created an opportunity for an entirely different approach. She was recruited into a classified program that utilized personnel with specialized backgrounds for deep cover intelligence operations. Her memory loss was actually considered an advantage for this type of work, as it eliminated the emotional attachments that might compromise an operative's effectiveness. Amanda was given a new identity, extensive training in intelligence methods, and assigned to long-term infiltration missions. Over the following years, Amanda worked under various covers in different parts of the world, gathering intelligence and disrupting terrorist operations. Her military training and natural abilities made her exceptionally effective at this work, and she became one of the program's most valuable assets. The official declaration of her death during Operation Silent Echo provided perfect cover for her new life. But Agent Martinez's revelation about Amanda was only the beginning of the story that would explain Sarah Mitchell's possession of the identical tattoo. The connection between the 2 women was far more complex and recent than anyone had suspected. During one of her assignments 3 years earlier, Amanda had been operating under deep cover in the United States, investigating a domestic terrorist cell with connections to international organizations. Her mission required her to establish a completely new identity and background, including employment in civilian positions that would provide access to the targets under investigation. One of these positions was with the security firm in San Diego, where Sarah Mitchell had worked before losing her job. Amanda, operating under the false identity of Rebecca Thompson, had been assigned to evaluate the company's security protocols and personnel for potential vulnerabilities. Her job required her to work closely with other security officers, including Sarah. During the 6 months they worked together, Amanda and Sarah had developed a professional friendship based on their shared experiences of overcoming difficult backgrounds. Amanda's cover story included elements of military service, though she could not reveal the true nature of her background without compromising her mission. Sarah had been impressed by Rebecca Thompson's military bearing and expertise, never suspecting that she was actually working alongside a highly classified intelligence operative. The friendship was genuine on both sides, with Amanda appreciating Sarah's resilience and intelligence despite her troubled past. The tattoo connection had emerged during one of their conversations about military culture and traditions. Sarah had expressed interest in getting a tattoo that would honor the military service she admired, but had never experienced herself. Amanda, still operating under her Rebecca Thompson cover, had shown Sarah photographs of various military-themed tattoos, including one that she claimed to belong to a deceased teammate. The photograph Amanda shared was actually her own original tattoo from before Operation Silent Echo. She had chosen to show it to Sarah as a way of discussing the deeper meaning of military service and sacrifice. Amanda explained the significance of each symbol and the personal dedication it represented, hoping to discourage Sarah from getting military-themed tattoos without having earned them through actual service. However, Sarah had been so moved by the story and the design that she memorized every detail. When their working relationship ended with the completion of Amanda's mission, Sarah eventually decided to recreate the tattoo as a tribute to the friend who had inspired her to strive for something better in her life. Sarah's gradual descent into military impersonation had begun months after Amanda's departure from the security firm. The tattoo served as a constant reminder of the respect and purpose she had witnessed in Rebecca Thompson, and it eventually became the centerpiece of the false identity she constructed. The irony was devastating. Sarah Mitchell had been inspired to impersonate a Navy SEAL by her friendship with the real Navy SEAL Amanda Chen, without ever knowing the true identity of the woman who had briefly shared her life. Amanda's attempt to discourage Sarah from dishonoring military service had inadvertently provided the foundation for Sarah's elaborate deception. Agent Martinez explained that Amanda was now facing her own crisis related to the case. Learning about Sarah's arrest and the exposure of her original tattoo design had triggered memories that her brain injury had suppressed. For the first time since her rescue, Amanda was beginning to remember fragments of her previous life, including her brother Marcus and the family she had forgotten. The psychological implications were staggering. Amanda Chen had spent 8 years serving her country under false identities, believing that she had no past worth remembering. The realization that she had a family who mourned her death and a brother who had never stopped searching for the truth about her disappearance was causing a fundamental reassessment of her priorities and loyalties. Admiral Harrison listened to Agent Martinez's explanation with a mixture of awe and profound sadness. The story revealed heroism and sacrifice at levels that challenged conventional understanding of military service. Amanda Chen had not only given her life for her country, she had given up her very identity and the possibility of a normal existence with the people she loved. The question now facing military leadership was whether to maintain the fiction that had protected Amanda's deep cover operations or to allow her to reclaim her original identity and reunite with her family. Either choice carried enormous risks and would require sacrifice from different people. For Sarah Mitchell, the revelation meant that her impersonation charges would need to be handled with extraordinary care. Her case had exposed one of the military's most sensitive operations, and her prosecution would need to be managed in a way that protected classified information, while still holding her accountable for her crimes. Admiral Harrison was tasked with developing recommendations for how to resolve the situation in a way that protected national security while addressing the human cost of 8 years of separation and deception. The tattoo that had started as a symbol of honor and service had become the key to unlocking one of the most complex moral and operational challenges in modern military history. As Harrison prepared his final report on the case, he reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had brought these two women together, across time and false identities. Sarah Mitchell's desperate desire for respect and belonging had led her to steal the identity of a true hero, while Amanda Chen's dedication to service had cost her the memory of everything that had made her who she was. The tattoo that connected them had become a symbol of sacrifice, loss, and the complex price of serving something greater than oneself. For both women, it represented a truth that transcended the false identities and classified operations that had brought their lives together in the most unexpected way possible.